So I want to make a sprite, and I would like to control the size of the sprite through a GUI, and every time I change the size I want to reset it and show the sprite at the new size. So with that in mind, because I've created a few toys and I worked on the sandbox GUI, I have a good idea of where I need to start. So I'm going to write some blocks of code and then explain it after I set them up. So I'm going to store the size of the sprite on my module, and I want to tweak it through a GUI. Alright, so I've stored my default variable size, 5 on midgetoy.mySpriteSize, and now I'm going to add a GUI control to my custom controls for the sandbox, and it's going to be numeric, and it's going to control the sprite size. The minimum is going to be 10, maximum is going to be, or the minimum is 1, the max is 10, and I can increase and decrease it by 1 at a time. And it's going to call the function setMySpriteSize, and that'll be called on midgetoy. And the starting default value is going to be my sprite size. And this is interchangeable. I can do this, which is actually midgetoy, or I can do midgetoy instead. So let's just stick with that. The next field is whether I want the toy to reset or not, which I do. And just for tooltip information, I'm just going to say and that's it. So by doing this, I've got a field on the toy, and now I have a GUI to control it. And as with most of our toys, once it's created, we just want to reset it to normal or default. So I'm going to call reset, and this will jump into this function. And if you look at some of the other toys, which I hope you have by now, you'll notice there's a trend of things that we do. So whatever scene I have, whatever's in it, I want to clear it out. And with my particular toy, I do not want gravity. So I'm going to set the X and Y gravity to 0. And I know I'm going to want to get the size of my sprite, so again, I can use this, or I'm just going to try and stay consistent. midgetoy.mySpriteSize. I'm going to create my sprite here. And then when that's done, I'm going to add to scene. Now, one interesting, scene objects and sprites, their size consists of 2 fields. So it's an X and a Y, which means my real size would be something like this. And I can just do that in one line. If I use space like this, it'll create the format that I'm looking for. So I'll delete this line. So this means that my sprite will be uniform. It's going to have the same width and same height. And now for this part, the setMySpriteSize, I'm going to create that function because it's going to be expected. The sandbox will make that callback. And it's always going to pass in a value for that particular control, the numeric option. And this is where I'll set value. Let's give this a run real quick, and provided I didn't make any syntax errors, I'll load it up. I'm going to show my tools. I'm going to go to midgetoy, and would you look at that? I now have a custom dynamic control that I can increase and decrease, and it's going to hit the limit, so I can never be larger than 10, and I can never be smaller than 1. So that's a pretty quick way to get some controls in if you want to start experimenting and creating toys. So I'm going to close that, and it does get kind of annoying that I have to keep going to it. So what I'm going to do is go back to the root of my repository, and there should be a preferences.cs. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to locate the default toy ID and change that to midgetoy. And then when I run, it should pop right up. So this will make it easier for me to just rapidly iterate and create things. Alright, so the next part is creating the sprite. And I'm going to create I guess an overkill function. I don't really need to create a function to create a sprite. I can just create it right here. But for the sake of showing how to create another script and executing it and then using that functionality, I am going to create a separate script and do that. So think ahead of time. I'm going to have a sprite equals build my sprite at a position and of a size. And so for right now, my position will be dead center, and I'll have to make sure I write this function. So I pass in the position, and the size we did previously by this line of code. And then once I have my sprite, I can add it to the scene like this. So right now this won't do anything. The code will execute, but I'll get an error. Let's see if I try and run it. I should get an error. Scene on add to scene could not find the specified object, and the reason is because it was unable to find function build Mitch sprite. So if I look back inside of here, got nothing going on. So I'm going to go back to my folder, into the scripts location, and I'm going to do that copy of my default script again, and I'm going to call this Mitch script. Let's just stay standard here. And if I look at it, this was my function call. I'm just going to build from that. Alright, and I guess the next part is to create the logic here. We're going to want to declare or define a new sprite and fill out its properties, give it an image, use the position variable, use the size variable, and at that point it should all start working.